Great. Thank you for joining the WWF press briefing as negotiations on the UN Biodiversity talks here in Nairobi draw to a close today. We're going to hear from WWF Global Leads. Our panel includes Marco Lambertini, Director General of WWF International, who will set out what has happened here in Nairobi and talk to the politics at play. We're also joined by Lin Li, who is our Global Policy and Advocacy Director, who will discuss what needs to happen in Montreal at COP15 and the role of the Chinese Presidency. Guido Brockhoven, Head of Policy, Research and Development at WWF International, who will provide more details on the negotiations, including what has happened around critical issues, progress or fallbacks. Laurent Somme, Head of Policy and Partnerships at WWF Africa, who will provide perspective on the status of conservation and restoration. And Vishal Upal, Director of Governance, Law and Policy at WWF India, who will discuss gender and equity issues, as well as DSI. I pass across to Marco.
Thank you very much, Scott, and thank you everybody for joining us today. So let me just start, first of all, by highlighting the importance of the negotiations in Nairobi. This is a critical moment in the history of our civilization when we're dealing with two major existential threats, in fact, more than two, but two in particularly interconnected, climate change and nature loss, biodiversity loss. The evidence of our impact on the natural world over the last particularly 6-7 decades is overwhelming. Reports after report, year after year in the last few years have shown how deeply that impact is. We have lost half of the forest, half of the coral reefs, 80% of the wetlands. We have 1 million species threatened with extinction. 2/3 of the wildlife population of land is disappeared in less than 50 years. And the statistics go on and on and on. Science is calling this a planetary crisis, and science is warning us that critical systems, ecosystems, and Earth systems are heading towards tipping point. Tipping point that will make our world looking very different from today, with a much higher level of instability that will put at risk our own development and survival. And that's why nature loss is not any longer a issue that it's not any longer an ecological issue only, or even a moral issue only in terms of our duty to coexist with nature. It is increasingly an issue that affects our economy, our society, our health, our well-being. In other words, it is a security issue for humanity, as serious, as dangerous as climate change. In fact, as we all know today, interconnected, because nature loss is exacerbating climate change, and climate change is, in turn, affecting nature loss. So the situation is very serious. There is no room for complacency, and we need a serious plan. A plan that we didn't have in the last decade. The previous biodiversity plan agreed under CBD in Nagoya, the Aichi targets, failed to deliver to bend the curve of nature, the curve of nature loss. And so now we need a new plan, more serious, more pointed, more science-based, more measurable, more ambitious. A Paris-style agreement for nature. That's what we need, where the world, whole society rallies around in delivering it. Let's now come to, so that's what we need. Now let's see the progress that we're making towards having such a plan. The week in Nairobi cannot be described differently from being painstakingly slow in progressing towards that plan. And the ambition they were seeing coming out of the Nairobi negotiations, it's nowhere near the ambition that we need to see in order to have that serious, ambitious plan. The overall ambition is not there, has been in fact dampened in some specific areas, and we'll hear more from my colleagues here today about that, even from where we were in Geneva a couple of months ago. It has been a groundhog day for the negotiations, been issues brought back again and again. There's been progress held hostage by a number of vocal countries opposing a strong ambition against nature loss. And In particular, we have seen countries playing a delay tactic. I have to mention one in particular that has been seriously disappointing in their behavior during the negotiation, and that is Brazil, followed by others as well. In terms of playing delay tactic, adding complexity, adding wording, going back to issues that were already, at least appear to be generating consensus, and effectively reaching an outcome that is absolutely unsatisfactory today. Let me finish to say that not all is lost. This is, after all, a negotiation. We still have a few months before the COP in Montreal in December. But let me just be very clear. The lack of progress in Nairobi is highlighting the fact that there is a real chance that we will fail in December to reach an ambitious agreement on nature. And that's unacceptable from our side. We will do our best to mobilize higher level political attention to these negotiations, and for the governments, the many governments, they have the huge number of governments, they already have committed to an ambitious plan to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and deliver a nature-positive future. We had more than 94 head of states having signed the Nature's Pledge that says exactly that. We want those leaders to now speak up and pay attention to these negotiations in the next few months, and in Montreal deliver what is needed to secure a safe future for all of us. A strong biodiversity agreement, measurable, with clear actions that will lead to a transformation of our production and consumption system, that will lead to more protection of the nature which is left today on the planet, and that will lead to a nature-positive future, a future where by the end of the decade we will have more nature than at its start. That's my overall opening lines, and Scott, back to you.
Thank you, Marco. Next we'll hear from Guido Brockhaven, Head of Policy, Research and Development at WWF International.
Thank you. What we would like to see in the plan is, first and foremost, more conservation. That is clear. But we also believe that the plan can make a step change in addressing the drivers of biodiversity loss. The footprint of our production and consumption need to be halved by 2030. And that means, first and foremost, addressing the agriculture and food systems. And although there's some good proposals on the table, we've seen very little progress on reaching consensus at the level that is required to make the transition of food and agricultural systems. Agriculture is currently responsible for 70% of biodiversity loss. If we can fix the food system and agriculture, we can save up to 41% of land area that's currently being used, and we can reduce wildlife loss by 48%. So we believe that this is an absolutely crucial element where progress needs to be made by parties, and where we need to achieve ambitious commitments at the goal and target level. At the moment, that's not the case. Parties are still disagreeing whether pesticides should be in or out of the framework. The driver of infrastructure, another major driver of biodiversity loss, has been deleted from the draft framework. So we really need to step up parties' commitments to address the drivers of biodiversity loss. Once we've got the content on conservation, on the drivers, there need to be commitment to implement the framework to avoid the failure of the previous plan. For that, we need three things. We need the numbers against which progress can be measured. Numbers are still not being agreed. We need an implementation mechanism that can help parties to monitor progress along the way. The implementation mechanism is being held hostage by the discussions and the lack of progress on the third element, which is the resource mobilization package. And there we need to do three things. Parties need to agree on addressing harmful subsidies, eliminating them by 2030 or repurposing them. We've seen incredibly low progress on reaching consensus at that level that is required. In addition, we need to address the bigger financial flows that underpin investments in the productive sectors that drive biodiversity loss. And there we're extremely concerned that negotiations are going in the wrong direction. Current proposals, previous proposals have been weakened. Commitments are being made more vague, and they're pushed down the road to 2050 rather than specific commitments towards 2030. And then the third element is of course, how are we going to pay for the plan? And there we think we need to have a holistic approach that includes a funding increase, substantial increase from both national and international sources, from both private and public sectors. We've seen discussions on resource mobilization. However, parties are still very far apart, too far apart on reaching consensus, again, at the level that is required to finance and implement an ambitious framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Guido. We now pass across to Laurent Somme, Head of Policy and Partnerships at WWF Africa.
Thank you. I think we all recognize that the Aichi target has been at the center, had at the center some area-based and species conservation outcome actions. This is the same ambitions also that want to see reflected in the GBFM. You will see that there are some goals and some targets that are trying to address that. Yeah, and you would also a popular discussion is these 30 by 30 that I'm sure all of you have heard about that. To conserve 30% of the earth that need to be conserved. Yes, we need to conserve more areas in the world, but under certain conditionalities. And a couple of them actually have been taken into account very seriously during this negotiation is the place of the indigenous people and the local community rights in that year. And these free, prior and informed consent of local communities is very key and fundamental to ensure that while we are going for the 30% of protection. But it's also very important to realize that all the protected areas that are going to be set up or are going to have to be effectively managed. We are using also the term well managed. This is still under discussion, and definitely equitably governed. Again, bringing into perspective the local community perspective in it. And in July in Kigali, the African countries are going to meet during the African Protected Area Congress. And that will be another opportunity for those parties to discuss how actually to address the need of better management of protected areas. And the final thing that's been discussed related to area-based conservation is the restoration. For Africa, it's actually a simple, I won't say, subject, because throughout one of the initiatives that was launched some time ago, it's called Africa 100, meaning that the African countries have committed actually to restore 100 million hectares of land. So I think in the waveland and in in these efforts, the African countries actually are really rallying around this idea of the restoration actions here. And but there's still a couple of technical and practical detail to be work on. That will be definitely the term of degradation, as simple as that, because within the CBD context, we don't have a definition of degradation, as simple as that, yeah. But we are trying to create, actually throughout this process, a synergy with another UN convention, which is a convention on the combating desertification. And the level of ambition also need to be set. Some countries are talking about 3 billion of lands, 3 billion of ocean. Yes, this is something that is not actually agreed upon. And finally, should we measure the success through absolute numbers or percentage?
Thanks, Laurence. We now pass across to Vishal Supal, Director of Governance, Law and Policy at WWF India.
Hello, everyone. I think I can just say that there are some very tiny, maybe positive steps also, because it was good to, encouraging to see that, the standalone gender target has received, a lot of support, a lot more support from parties than it was when it was in Geneva. We also have seen some good positive elements and enabling conditions mentioned, in that first section, especially very critical aspects like equitable governance, rights-based approaches, equity. I think, yes, some of them are in brackets, which is a cause of concern, but I think there is some progress there. And what we really need is that we really need the parties to wholeheartedly support these enabling conditions and elements, because for the plan to be effective and implementable at the ground, to be inclusive, we need such things, because without all of these elements, you cannot really have an ambitious and a transformative plan. So that's it. I think for DSI, there is still a long way to go. There is an informal advisory group which is meeting in September. There is a work of the consultants they are going to look at policy, approaches and things like that. So I think that is something which is still a cause of concern. It's not really, I won't really say there's any much progress in that, but then we have to wait till September, because that's a meeting where the informal advisory group will meet and then, advise. So we need to wait and watch for that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And we now turn to Lin Li, Director of Global Policy and Advocacy at WWF International.
Thank you, Scott. You have heard from us, the process is painfully slow and on many fronts. And this is unacceptable for us facing this urgent crisis we're facing on the biodiversity and climate crisis that we're facing. So therefore, we now have a finishing line. So the decision of the date and location of COP15 Part 2 set a finishing line that all parties has to really work together to go through that, to agree an agreement that is ambitious to deliver the future like we need, a nature positive future that we need. So from now on to the finishing line, which is December, we only have like 5 months plus few days left. This is really challenging. So we also see the process very slow. So what has a lot need to be done in between now, Nairobi to Montreal. Few things we need to really call out. First of all, the presidency still stays with China, even the location moved due to uncontrollable circumstances. So we're calling the presidency and all parties to put out the political leadership to turn the attention on nature, the political commitment made by the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, made at the Kunming Declaration in the COP15 Part 2, to turn that into a negotiation table agreement. Basically, we can turn the political will into the action, into the agreement. At the same time, we also need a high-level political attention between now and COP15 to address the issues, critical issues mentioned about what does the mission look like, what is the financial mechanism look like, how we can really ensure the implementation that taking on the action of countries and all part of society. And this all need to be worked together between now and September. So the world need create a few high-level moments that to really get attention about nature even higher and wider, which we observed the attention is higher now at the global level. At the same time, the attention is wider. We see more of a non-state actors from development organizations, humanitarian organizations, faith groups, all put attention on nature and biodiversity, because we all understand we have only one home. This is the only thing we have in the diverse universe. So we need to work together. So political attention, political will, political leadership, political support is needed between now and urgently needed between now and December. At the same time, we also observe the gap in between the political commitment and the slow process in the negotiation table. So we also urgently need the attention, the action of the parties to turn their ambition into their negotiation table, so that we'll be able to passing the finishing line with a global biodiversity framework that will assure us a nature-positive future and contributing to the climate-neutral future and its equitable future we all need by 2030 to achieve sustainable development goals. So that's really attention. More action needed, more attention needed, more translating of political commitment into the negotiation needed, and the world need to get ready to implement once we agree. So I will stop there, turning back to Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. We will now turn to questions from the room and online before some short concluding comments from Marco Lambertini. So any questions in the room to start?
So I see that you've called out one party and you've called out. Hi, my name is Aruna Chandrasekhar. I'm with Carbon Brief. So just to get a sense of the state of play of what is being held up and how are things being held up, I think we have a good idea of what success is, or at least the marginal amount of success that we have seen at Nairobi. But you did mention Brazil is holding up progress, but also a variety of other nations. How in particular is this happening, and in which particular sectors? Is this largely on resource mobilization? And to what extent will we see this being bumped to Montreal, especially on things like numbers?
Thank you very much. As I mentioned, I think from some countries like Brazil, the impression, and actually the evidence, more than impression, is that there is a tendency to obstruct progress in any possible way. Let me just be super blunt on that, and it's not just about some specific issues. It's about the whole global biodiversity framework, and the idea to the tactic is clear. We're going to send, at the current moment in time, we're basically sending to a final rushed negotiation in COP15 before the endorsement, the agreement of the GBF, and by the way, other decisions that will be taken in COP. We're sending a text which is absolutely far from being agreed. The chances that a text so divided in terms of point of views, alternative language, lack of measurements, divergence of views on so many things, a text like this will have no chance to translate into a strong global biodiversity framework at the last minute. This is not a text that could go to the 11th hour negotiation. So that's been a tactic. It's been a successful tactic, unfortunately, we feel, but now something else needs to happen at the high political level to correct that.
Thank you. And maybe just to go to a related online question from Gloria Dickey at Reuters. Beyond Brazil, which are the other key parties blocking progress and on which targets? Also, how is the 30 by 30 target progressing? Perhaps for 30 by 30, Laurent?
Yes, the 30 by 30, I think what we could certainly rely on, it is high-level political engagement through the High Ambition Coalition. And we really want to see that, as Lynn was saying, to translate what has been committed at that level into very clear direction to the negotiating parties and so on. And we do believe that at the end of the day, if those conditionalities are well understood and approved, we should be able actually to scale up the ambition. But yes, it's still contentious, be it at the regional level, but we are confident that from the regional consultations and the time that we have between now and Montreal, we get actually more engagement from the principal to actually give more direction and so on. This is our real hope. It has to come from the top.
Anyone else? Okay. Any more questions? Let's go back to the room. Questions in the room.
Hi, I'm Monica from India. I wanted to ask on the agriculture aspects. So there is this huge debate on the productivity side. The word productivity has not been mentioned in the documents, and sort of there is conflict on the word productivity. And also you mentioned about pesticides, that there is conflict again on pesticides. And again, we are seeing that there is food security questions, especially when we are talking about African countries or Asian countries. So what is happening on those sides, and do you think that the word productivity, food security, pesticide, chemicals, things like that, or things like would come in the text, and what will be the progress? Thank you.
I wish I knew. I think these are all contentious issues. What we are hoping for is that there will be a realization amongst parties that if we don't address our agriculture and food systems, we will not be able to achieve and sustain conservation, will not be able to reach a nature-positive world by 2030. The issue of pesticides in the medium term, they're bad for productivity, they're bad for pollinators and for soil biodiversity. So what is needed is really a strategy of a transformation of the agricultural and food systems approach that's currently being taken.
And if I may add one element to what Guido just said, what I think we should not forget is that the combination, the convergence of climate and biodiversity crisis is going to be the main threat to food security. Of course, we are seeing now food security impacted by specific conflicts, particularly one in Ukraine, but the actual underlying issues of the current food system is that it is exacerbating climate change and nature loss, and the two together will be the death sentence for food security in the next few decades.
Thank you. Turning to an online question, a couple of questions from Megan Rowling at Thomson Reuters Foundation. Firstly, what does China need to do in the coming months in order to avoid a Copenhagen-style failure for this new accord in December? And secondly, you are calling for more political attention and political will to land an ambitious nature deal. How can that be created when there are so many competing urgent issues at the global level now? Perhaps Marco or Lynn?
Yeah. So China obviously, as the president of the COP15, has a critical role to play in terms of providing the leadership that is needed and rallying more leadership at the top level to address the contentious issues, the divisions. They're still very obvious in the text, and do that in the lead up to COP15, not waiting for COP15 itself. That's the role of the presidency, but it's not just the role of China, it's the role of everyone. Everyone needs to be really moving into a space of consensus building and true commitment to deliver an agreed, strong, fit-for-purpose biodiversity agreement. The second question was?
Second question. Yes.
How to get the political will. Well, look, this is the political will is there. We have seen conference after conference, including COP26, major commitment from head of states about the connection, the protection of nature vis-à-vis climate, protection of nature vis-à-vis ecological systems functionality. We've seen, as I said earlier, 94 head of states signing a leaders' pledge for nature that commits to the halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. There is a even larger coalition around protection of ocean and land, 30% by 2030. So the political awareness about nature has never been greater. And the same happens in the corporate sector. There are thousands of companies joining the New Business for Nature coalition. There are asset owners, banks, investment and financial institutions equaling several trillions of dollars of assets joining a Finance for Biodiversity alliance. There is a task force on nature-related, risk-related disclosure. We have seen in the last few years a massive growth in awareness about the seriousness of nature loss and the consequences this is having on our economy. Half of the GDP, this is a World Economic Forum assessment, half of the GDP, $44 trillion, is somehow directly or indirectly dependent on natural ecosystems. Think about the agricultural sector, fishing sector, tourism sector, but also industrial sector that depends on, for example, regular access to water for industrial processes. All this is clear. The question is that we haven't seen that reflected yet at the negotiation level, and we need that to happen. So that's what the political leadership needs to do in the next few months.
Thank you. A follow-up from Gloria Dickey to her question on blockers. Could the panel provide more information on which other countries are blocking targets? Is there anything we can provide on that?
I would say, I mentioned Brazil, and Brazil is such an important country per se on biodiversity, and we know what's happening into the Amazon today. But I mentioned Brazil particularly because I think we've seen a consistent approach in terms of dampening ambition. But other countries have been opposing or having different views on specific issues. But we believe that those differences can be resolved by intervention on higher political level. What we need to see is specific countries like Brazil to stop undermining the overall ambition at all levels in the negotiations.
Questions from the room?
Hello, I'm Diwakar from Nepal. So at least two of you said that the progress has been painstakingly slow and it is unacceptable. So tonight the negotiations will be over, and it is almost certain that it will not be over. The debate will not be over. So what is your strategy from Nairobi to Montreal, to move from Nairobi to Montreal? Thank you.
I'm going to go again? Maybe you can handle it.
I can,
You want to go?
I can go
Please.
start. So this process, we came from Geneva to Nairobi with a hope to narrow down the divergency and finding more convergency here. But then we actually found out that the more divergent than convergency that we have found in this process. So that's why I'm saying unacceptable, because we agreed in Geneva, all the parties agreed in Geneva, and then we come here, we open that again. And as Marco mentioned, we cannot leave this text, go to the COP15, just be deciding in a rush last hour to get that, because that's really what this world needed. So what we need a lot from now on to the December, there are many layers. The layers of political level we mentioned, the political attention, will, support, need to really land down in their negotiation room. So their internal dynamic, they have to work on in a country, how to bring that on the table. On the table to defend what is progressive that we all needed. And so make sure the defending voice is louder. We hear defending voice sometimes not as strong as should be. That's one. We also need the negotiators to really listen to their global commitment, their leaders. If 94, 3 countries, head of states, signed the Leaders of Pledge for Nature. More than 90 countries signed the Kunming Declaration and the COP15. That's their commitment. So bring their commitment on the table. That's really needed. At the same time, we also need the civil society coming together, because this is not only party need to make decision, but this decision for all of us. As a citizen of this planet, right? We need really level all the business, civil society, non-state actors coming together to push their own government, their own country, who is holding the pen, making the agreement to make sure that what we need for a nature-positive future, for a sustainable future, to be landed on the negotiation text. So I mean, this need all whole around approach together. I don't think there's a one silver bullet that can solve those issues altogether.
Anyone want to add?
What
No?
will you do from tomorrow?
We will mobilize high-level political leadership. That the dialogue now needs to happen at that level. In the negotiation room, that dialogue has failed, and I think we need to have that dialogue now escalate to the next political level.
And maybe to add to it, I think this dialogue should continue at different levels. And I will take the case of the regional level, because we know how important the regional positions are, particularly in Africa. So the African countries to continue talking to each other. And even within each country, individual country, there are many stakeholders that should create platform and opportunity for them to continue that dialogue, to higher the understanding, because very often these blockages are due to the fact that the interpretation of certain issues and that will actually end up with maybe some decision that would have been taken. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Law?
Yeah, Laure Fillon from AFP. I'd like to know, you're talking about parties trying to delay the negotiations. On the other side, is there any leader among the parties? So, yeah, thanks.
There are many leaders, no doubt about that, across the whole world. We have seen strong leadership from many, many countries in the lead up and during the negotiations. But as you know, the rules of the games here are building consensus. And so, unfortunately, it's quite easy for a few voices to dampen that consensus, that ambition based on the process as it stands. So, there is no doubt there are plenty of leadership, and there is no doubt that some of the higher level ambition that is in the text today will be carried forward anyway, irrespectively from the outcome in Montreal by a specific group of countries. But that's not what we want. What we want is a universal agreement, Paris style, on nature.
Great, we've got a few more minutes, so a couple of last questions from the floor.
I'm Peter, standing in for the Guardian. If we focus on Nairobi right now, I think from what we hear informally, it could be like we've only got a clean text on maybe 2 targets out of 22, and there was even talk of an additional ones. If we go to COP26, notwithstanding what the informal group that the lady mentioned in between September somewhere, and things go down at COP15, what would that mean for biodiversity going forward? And what would worry you most if COP15 does not achieve the targets that have been set?
Well, I'm going to be blunt again. Anything shorter than a global biodiversity framework that delivers more nature at the end of the decade than there was at the start would be a failure. We have lost so much nature, and ecosystems are reaching tipping point. And we'll call it out. We call it a failure. And it's not the time for agreeing to an inadequate global biodiversity framework. In Montreal, we need to agree to a framework which is fit for purpose to deal with nature loss and bend the curve and restore a lot of what we lost, because we can. We know that we can do that. And so it's a question of willingness, and that's what we expect from COP15 in Montreal.
Hi. Sort of a follow-up question to Monica's. What is the status in terms of pesticides? And especially in terms of agreeing that we saw, perhaps I think on day 1 there was disagreement, and here we are on the final day. And also in terms of subsidies for, I think at one stage it was considered that we should remove specific references to agriculture as well as fisheries from the text was something that we heard. From what you can see, are we still, especially considering the food system and land use change is so vital on the climate front, is that still the case? Yeah.
Well, a number of countries there's a number of good proposals on the table, but as I said, there's still, after a week, there's disagreement on some of these fundamental issues, like the use of pesticides, like the sustainable and healthy diets, like issues around food systems transformation. 30% of food get lost after it gets harvested. So there's a lot of things that need to be done and that can be done, but are not yet agreed at the level of ambition that is needed.
Yeah, we're close to time, so maybe final two questions.
Just one last thing. We saw that there is clean text on 19.2 and 19.1 is still in discussions, and it's a huge topic for developing countries because it's finance. I wanted Vishesh to comment upon this because you are also following DSI, and so what will be the follow-up on this? What does it mean if we have clean text on 19.2 and 19.1 is still under conflict? So does that even mean any progress, because the numbers and the money that should be on the table has not been discussed, but we are talking about strengthening the capabilities. So what does it even mean? Yeah, thank you.
So I think 19.1 actually ties to a lot of things. So it is crucial that there are adequate and resources. But the fact is that you also need capacity. So it is just not about resources. So to have a clean 19.2 is a very welcome thing, because there is a very strong recognition that for any GBF to be implemented at a national and a subnational level or a local level, you also need capacity. So I think capacity, technology, and so many other things. So I think that's a good thing that we at least have, a clean text on that. There's a good consensus. Yes, these numbers, the numbers for financial and resource, that will be negotiated. And yes, there are a lot of brackets right now, and there are lots of diverse views about it. But, this is, this is a consensus building exercise. And if all of you were there in the earlier COPs also, you've seen that these discussions and deliberations do take time. But I'm sure everyone with a positive mindset, if they all come together, we will come to some consensus. But I would like others to add more. Yeah.
I think we're at time, so I'm going to pass over to Marco Lambertini for concluding remarks.
Well, not so many concluding remarks, just stressing the fact that we are at the point where we really have the unmissable chance to redefine our relationship with nature. This is a relationship that has been broken, we know that now, that for several decades particularly, and it is the opportunity to reverse nature loss in a way that will sustain our development in moving forward, sustainably, equitably, and in a way that preserves the amazing diversity of life on Earth as well. And nothing less than that ambition, nothing less than an ambition to hold, traverse, and restore nature by the end of the decade, so that, as I said at the beginning, we have more forest, more fish in the ocean and rivers, more pollinators in the countryside, more biodiversity globally. That's the ambition that we need to embrace. Anything shorter than that will be a missed opportunity that we won't accept. And we're going to work very hard in supporting governments and other players to agree to that ambition and translate that ambition into a concrete plan that will help us deliver a sustainable, equitable, carbon neutral, and nature positive future. Thank you very, very much for your attention today, and to be continued, as we say, but hope are still high, despite what we call today a very disappointing outcome of the Nairobi negotiations. Thank you. Thank you very much.